After Marcel took on the Dungeon Lord role, we've seen a lot of changes in the dungeon. Also with her, one is brutally killing Ms. Ern. Will Laios and his party be able to convince her to relinquish her powers to stop all the madness happening? What role will the winged lion play in the unfolding events? Let's find out. Marcel, having regained her senses, was informed by Laios that urgent action was required to halt the advancing monsters. Inquiring about the potential danger, she expressed concern over the possibility of death, to which Laios responded that they must simply strive to prevent such an outcome, with Namari and Siro lending their support. He highlighted that the power of the dungeon was overwhelming for any individual and advised her to relinquish her role as the Dungeon Lord. Questioning whether she could repel the monsters, Marcel tearfully acknowledged that she had never truly controlled them and agreed to attempt to halt their advance. She focused her efforts and issued a command for them to cease their movements. The creatures now encircle the tower they occupy. Marcel pleaded with them to halt, but to her astonishment, they continued. Rather than ceasing, their aggression intensified. As Chilchuk observed, Laios examined his hand, puzzled by the winged lion's silence. He realized it was influenced by the lion. In response, the lion stated he was merely granting her wishes. Marcel questioned why the monsters persisted. The lion clarified that her lingering fear was the cause. Internally, Marcel contemplated the possibility of punishment if she surrendered now. This trace of fear in her was being sensed by the monsters, prompting them to defend her. Laios was astounded. Feeling frightened is a completely normal reaction. He found it unbelievable that the lion expected her to control even her subconscious desires. As Laios and Marcel exchanged glances, she devised a plan. She requested Laios to aim his sword at her. Although Laios was puzzled by her intentions, Marcel urged him to remain still, explaining that she needed to end things properly. As Marcel directed the sword towards herself, Laios protested, insisting there must be another solution. Chilchuk, too, was taken aback. Marcel acknowledged that they were running out of time and confessed that since she had created this mess, it was her responsibility to resolve it. Marcel approached Laios, prompting him to shout her name. She slammed the book against his hand. Gradually, the winged lion adhering to Laios' hand writhed and retreated into the book. Marcel now understood why Thistle had sealed it away as he did. Constantly having all your wishes granted is way too much, she remarked. Their attention then shifted to the monsters. Everyone outside was intrigued, noting that the monsters seemed to have calmed. Catching her breath, Marcel finally noted that things had quieted down. Chilchuk inquired whether she had sealed away the winged lion. Marcel replied that it was more about her beginning to control her desires. Now, she felt she could consider her options more calmly. They might argue that she was under control, but she confessed to being fully conscious and aware throughout. She herself killed people and summoned monsters willingly as her desires intensified. Conversely, her reluctance, "Oh, I don't want to do this," seemingly disappeared and felt as though it hadn't yet returned. She expressed a desire to remain calm as they discussed it, but from her perspective, becoming the lord of the dungeon was absolutely inadvisable. Her companions acknowledged they were already aware of this. Chilchuk stated that they would support her, but insisted she relinquish her role as lord immediately. Puzzled, she wondered how she could stop being the lord, aside from dying. Unfortunately, they did not have an answer either. Marcel was also concerned about the potential consequences of relinquishing her role as the lord of the dungeon immediately. She revealed that she had altered the dungeon's layout, and now the entire structure felt fragile, exhibiting cracks and other signs of instability. Her worry was that it might collapse. If the monsters became uncontrollable, they would face significant danger. When questioned whether she could restore the dungeon to its original state, she explained that breaking the seal to do so would revert her to her former state as well. They concurred that this would be unwise. Laios suggested that they couldn't solve this just by contemplating. They needed to seek external advice. Marcel expressed apprehension about whether it would be safe and whether they would be attacked. Laios reassured her that it would probably be fine and promised to be cautious. Suddenly, Laios peered out the window and inquired if anyone knew how to cease being a dungeon lord. The crowd outside was astounded. Kabru felt elated that Laios have successfully persuaded Marcel, while Namari was confident in his abilities to assist. Patdol responded by sending a fairy to Laios, which confirmed whether he was asking about relinquishing lordship of the dungeon. Laios affirmed. The fairy, channeling Flamila, called him a fool and declared that it wouldn't be easy. Through the fairy, Flamila reminded him to consider his actions. Breaking the seal on the demon, altering the dungeon's layout, unleashing monsters, and creating a massive opening on the surface. Flecky chimed in, noting they had also caused a significant injury to their captain's head. She questioned whether Patdol could revive him from such a state, to which she replied that she was doing her best. There are methods to relinquish the title of Lord of the Dungeon, either through death or by distancing oneself from the dungeon. However, these options are not feasible currently. She continued to explain the dire situation on the surface. Half of the island has been engulfed by the dungeon. The soldiers of Kakabrud are organizing a defense, but it is uncertain how long they can withstand the relentless onslaught of monsters emerging from the dungeon. Reports have also surfaced that mana is flowing from dungeons globally. If the concentration of mana on the surface continues to increase, the boundary between the surface world and the dungeon realms will eventually dissolve. With each moment, our world is increasingly dominated by the demon's influence. To prepare for the crisis, they first needed to seal the hole, establish a barrier, and appoint a substitute lord. However, she soon realized that their initial step must be to mobilize soldiers and evacuate civilians. Given the current state of affairs, the world had already descended into chaos due to their actions. Flamila remarked that nothing they do now could fully rectify the past damages. This revelation deeply saddened Marcel. Laios, contemplative and silent, then posed a question. What if he were to defeat the demon? The elves were taken aback by this suggestion. Laios speculated that defeating the demon might not be advisable. The complete disappearance of mana from their world would be disastrous. Instead, he believed he might be able to normalize mana levels to something like water or air. Flamila dismissed this idea as absurd, explaining that a demon is not a living entity, making his proposal unfeasible. Laios explained that while the original nature of the demon might have been different, his recent dialogue with it led to a significant realization. Demons feed on human desires for growth, effectively making them living entities defined by this intrinsic attribute. This consumption of human desires has rendered the demon all too human. It now grasps what brings joy to people and what they detest. This shift also means the demon is now incapable of escaping human-like thought processes. Consequently, the demon, once impervious, is no longer invincible. Similar to how living creatures are vulnerable when they eat, the demon has its weaknesses exposed. Laios proposed that if given the opportunity, he would confront and defeat the winged lion, leveraging this newfound vulnerability. The elves were in disbelief. Flamila demanded who would agree to that, and told him to be quiet. At that moment, the reincarnated Mizurn appeared and countered. Flamila is the one who needs to be quiet. He took the fairy from her and questioned Laios. Do you truly believe you can defeat the demon? Laios affirmed, adding that if they failed to act, the human race might face extinction. He explained that even if Marcel had not become the dungeon lord, the winged lion would likely have selected another in her stead. Such is the nature of this creature. The world consists of those who consume and those who are consumed. Those who overindulge are doomed to fall. Given the current circumstances, Laios felt that victory was within reach. Mizurn asked Laios to defeat the demon. Still feeling woozy from his recent revival, Mizurn was supported by Pathdol, who suggested he rest first, noting he had just been brought back. Suddenly, the monsters shifted their attention towards the red dragon. Sishis identified a massive monster emerging from the water. The monster, clearly amused, acknowledged their intent to defeat him. Abruptly, he lifted the tower, declaring they knew what was required for their desire to be realized. He then angled the tower towards his mouth, prompting Laios to tightly grasp the railing. At that critical moment, Laios called out to the lion to stop. Believing he might be able to address the demon issue, he asked Mizern for a favor. When Mizern inquired about the nature of the favor, Laios simply requested a meal. Laios declared his intention to provide a meal for every single person present. He sought a promise from Mizern that everyone there would share a meal together. Namari and Kabru were stunned by this request, while Mizern agreed, saying, "You've got a deal." The others expressed their despair with groans. Laios sought confirmation from Mizern, emphasizing the importance of not turning back on his promise, to which Mizern affirmed his commitment. He then urged Laios to ensure the demon's defeat. Laios, with a smile, assured him that they would prove they could retaliate against the demon. At that moment, the lion began to consume the entire tower, including Laios and his party. After finishing, the lion even let out a burp. Witnessing this, everyone was left speechless, realizing they had just been devoured. Kabru pondered whether this was how the world would end. Let's journey back to ancient times, before humanity came into existence. It was already present. Initially, it was merely a drifting speck, devoid of will, intelligence, or emotions, a foreign object that had wandered into the world. Time passed, and it eventually became aware of something. A vast multitude of writhing entities. Their voices merged into a cacophonous din, each echoing the same pleas. "I'm hungry, I want to eat, my tummy's empty." It didn't understand their words, yet the message was uniform. In an experiment, it offered its body to one of them. It discovered its own taste and settled down. However, after some time, the cries resumed, "I want food." Another intriguing event occurred. The fragment of its body that it offered became integrated into this world. Amused, it continued to feed parts of itself to them. This cycle persisted for some time. Its curiosity deepened about why these creatures engaged in this behavior. Deciding to mimic them, it consumed one of the creatures, discovering a flavor more delightful than anything it had previously encountered. This experience brought an understanding of hunger. Simultaneously, it learned that in this world, things that are consumed eventually cease to exist. It was tempted to embark on an eating spree, but realized doing so would mean the end of its food supply. Opting for moderation, it decided to savor experiences gradually. It also discovered that the flavor of its offerings could change based on its method of feeding. Observing a bird, it transformed into a worm, reasoning that the bird would prefer this over its original form. As time passed, it experienced a wide array of flavors. Then, one day, it encountered a person. One man wished to cook his food, another sought a reliable water source, while a third craved something more delicious. These desires intrigued it deeply. The more it fulfilled their wishes, the more unique their flavor became. It aspired to consume something superior to what others could access. As the desires grew more complex, it did everything within its power to accommodate them. It altered its form, mastered their language, and delivered precisely what they desired. However, some wishes were beyond its capability to fulfill, no matter the effort expended. An example was their hope for blessings that would last forever. It understood what they meant. Their desires were delectable, but vanished the moment it consumed them. If only it could provide perpetual blessings as they requested, then it could feast eternally. When humans witnessed its actions, fulfilling their longing for wealth and treasures, they were shocked, perceiving these acts as divine interventions. As it grew, human flesh held little appeal, yet it complied with their wishes for such behavior. When it sought more, the creatures conferred and informed what they called the mighty god that they could give no more. Subsequently, it found itself confined within the narrow confines of a dungeon. Its actions were significantly more limited than in the past. Occasionally, people would visit, positioning themselves as its masters and presenting their desires, such as immortality. The nature of these desires continually evolved. Despite the dungeon's cramped conditions, the flow of desires remained constant, keeping it content. As long as it maintained its subservience, there was a possibility that it might one day escape. Then, one day, it encountered an old man whose wish was chillingly somber. He wanted it to destroy the world. Complying, It unleashed destruction through fire. Astonished that anyone would desire such devastation, now they were all dead. It pondered what had gone wrong this time. Weren't they supposed to be content as long as they were well-fed? Yet, they had perished. As it collected their skulls, it lamented the lost opportunity to ever taste them again. Had it known the outcome, never again being able to savor them, it would have opted not to constantly fear depleting its food supply, but rather to consume them all beforehand. Now, it experienced starvation and felt hunger. Despite the devastation, a few survivors remained. When one man confronted it and tried to fight, it inquired if he harbored any desires. It offered to fulfill whatever he wished. As the man's stomach growled, he asked for meat to eat, and it granted his request. The man was overjoyed to discover an animal and called his companions to join him. They all savored the meal indoors while it observed them. These survivors were still mere seeds, but it recognized the need to nurture them carefully. It resolved to proceed slowly and with caution. This time, it was determined to fulfill their wish, a banquet table perpetually heaped with blessings. Returning to the present, the winged lion gazed at the crack leading to the surface. One final step remained before it could reach the surface world, and to take that step, it declared its need for their desires. The winged lion turned to Laios and his party, expressing pleasure at seeing them again. After being swallowed by the winged lion, Laios and his companions found themselves in some ruins. They puzzled over the location. Senshi noted that the architecture resembled that of the buildings in the dungeon, yet the atmosphere felt markedly different. Chilchuk observed the absence of wind and warmth, which he found quite discomforting. Marcel felt as though she were swimming in an ocean of mana, which made her feel ill. Suddenly, the winged lion declared, "This is my treasure vault." When Laios questioned whether he was referring to the bones and ruins, the lion explained that to them, these might appear as ruins, but for him, each piece represented a fragment of a dearly beloved memory. Laios inquired if they were just that appetizing. The lion lamented his missed opportunity to consume them. He then questioned what they had decided to do next. Laios affirmed, "That's right." The lion gazed at them intently. Meanwhile, Chilchuk and Marcel were curious about what Laios really intended to do. Laios asked for some time to deliberate, which the lion granted. He then conferred with his group to summarize their findings. They concluded that a demon could not be harmed with conventional weapons. Thus, to address the issue of the winged lion, they needed to exploit its power and inherent nature. Specifically, the lion's nature compels it to fulfill human desires, which is its vulnerability. Laios shared his strategy. To leverage this weakness, he proposed taking Marcel's position as Lord of the Dungeon. However, the group appeared unenthusiastic about the idea. Laios elaborated that he would immediately wish for a peaceful world where demons do not disturb humans, confident that the winged lion would be compelled to grant this desire. Once demons are obligated to leave humans alone, he believed all problems would be resolved. Marcel, seeking further details, asked if there was more to his plan. Laios confirmed that this was the extent of it. Chilchuk expressed skepticism about the simplicity and feasibility of the plan, while Azutsumi predicted that Laios' strategy would merely result in him being dressed in an absurd outfit and reduced to a drooling fool. Laios explained that in Marcel's case, her dream of eliminating the significant lifespan disparities between races was exploited by the winged lion, which manifested in her wearing a bizarre outfit. However, Laios noted that he doesn't harbor a genuine dream. While he was initially attracted to the idea of a country of monsters, his perspective changed after witnessing the reality, suggesting the winged lion miscalculated. Marcel countered that his plan wouldn't succeed. Once under the winged lion's influence, controlling his desires would become impossible. She questioned what would happen if the lion tapped into desires Laios was not even aware he had, arguing that desires cannot simply be willed away. After reflecting on the situation, Marcel expressed optimism about the plan, feeling that it might actually succeed. Chilchuk, however, pointed out that she was still under the lion's influence, and Azutsumi jokingly suggested she simply discard her clothes. Laios acknowledged the challenges ahead. admitting that leveraging the demon's power was their only option and doubting the ease of the task. He expressed certainty that without support, he would quickly lose his sanity. This led him to seek assistance from his companions. Specifically, he requested Marcel to seal the winged lion into a book to help him maintain control over his desires, similar to what Thistle had previously done. Marcel expressed reservations, noting that even if Laios was willing to try, the books needed for such an endeavor were no longer available. Laios then proposed using the Dungeon Gourmet Guidebook as an alternative. Although uncertain, Marcel agreed to attempt it. Laios turned to Chilchuk, requesting him to think of the most effective words to bring him back to his senses when necessary. Whether it be an admonition, a lecture, or guidance, anything to distract him from acting oddly. He then asked Senshi to prepare something special for him, similar to the local cuisine he once made for Marcel. Lastly, Laios assigned Izutsumi what he described as the easiest task, despite her reluctance to undertake anything bothersome. He quietly instructed her that if he began acting even slightly strange, she should not hesitate to kill him immediately. Laios stated that if he were to lose his mind, it would signify their defeat. He urged Izutsumi to take everyone and escape the dungeon, explicitly requesting that they not attempt to revive him. Izutsumi brought up his earlier promise to share a meal with everyone, to which Laios, pleading with her, asked her to fulfill this request instead, and she consented. With everyone's tasks assigned, Laios summoned the winged lion and requested to be made the lord of the dungeon. This prompted the lion to rise, remarking that he had indeed kept him waiting, and invited him forward. Laios approached, and the lion enveloped him with its wings, completing the transformation. Laios was puzzled by the outcome. The lion confirmed that he had indeed become the lord of the dungeon, fulfilling his wish. Laios reflected, not anticipating that he would be separated from his companions, deeming the plan a failure from the outset. When the lion inquired if there was a problem, Laios initially requested a world free from the fear of demons. The lion challenged whether that was truly his desire and urged him to remember his first days there. He noted Laios's growth, recalling how just a few years prior, he had seemed unreliable, always struggling alongside his sister for money and food. Yet, the lion observed that at his core, Laios had not changed and was still profoundly disillusioned with the human world. The winged lion knew of his disinterest in people, finding monsters far more intriguing. He bluntly told Laios that he held no concern for the future of the world, nor was he inclined to sacrifice himself for the greater good. As long as his friends were safe, the fate of others, should they be ensnared in the dungeon's collapse, was of no concern to him. Laios was taken aback by this, reflecting that, aside from virtuous altruists, most people might share a similar sentiment. Realizing the lion could perceive all his thoughts, Laios urged the lion to quickly begin fulfilling his wishes. His first request was for a world without demons, as he affirmed his role as the lord of the dungeon. If that was indeed his true desire, the lion said he would grant it. However, the lion noted that this was not really the case now. He despised other humans, which is why he admired monsters. They kill humans, taking forms designed to threaten, terrorize, and slaughter. Laios, however, insisted that the lion was completely mistaken. When the lion asked if he had never imagined a pack of monsters attacking a village, Laios dismissed it as a childish fancy. The lion then questioned the value of a peaceful world where the dungeon and monsters would disappear, suggesting Laios would lose his way of life and all his knowledge of monsters would become obsolete. He probed what Laios would have left and whether he could endure an empty life in such a dull world. Additionally, the lion brought up Laios's sister, questioning if he had come to a realization yet. He pointed out the contradiction in Laios's desires. He wanted others to live in a world without magic, yet he hoped to resurrect his sister, a task requiring magic. He suggested Laios might be acting selfishly. The lion remarked that if Laios wished for a peaceful world, it would mean his sister could no longer be revived. Shifting the mood, the lion proposed they move away from such somber topics to discuss something more uplifting. He expressed understanding of what Laios truly desired, to become a monster. This desire was fueled by a rumor that had caught his interest. Within the boundaries of a dungeon, it is possible for a human to turn into a monster. Although the idea might seem far-fetched, the lion was convinced that a small part of Laios held out hope that it could be true. Laios, however, insisted that the lion was mistaken. The lion responded, urging him not to be shy, as he possessed the power to fulfill his desires. He offered to transform Laios into the most powerful and magnificent monster the world had ever seen, allowing him the freedom to soar through the skies above. In return, Laios would need to surrender his body to the lion. The lion promised that he would return to Laios's friends in his body and assure them that he had found peace. If desired, he could guarantee their safety, ensure their way of life and lifespans remained unaffected, and ensure that Marcel would not have to be alone. Using Laios's body, the lion proposed standing alongside his sister to support Marcel through her final days. Additionally, if Laios desired, the lion could even grant her children. The lion challenged him, questioning whether these offerings were more significant than a mere superficial wish for a peaceful world. The lion then pressed for his decision, enticing him with the prospect of ruling the world together. It seemed Laios had reached a decision. The lion then asked him to consume his flesh. After a brief pause, Laios approached the winged lion and, with a gulp, began to eat. He voraciously consumed the lion's body, and soon, something began to bulge from his back, ripping and tearing his flesh as something new emerged from behind him. From their vantage point, Marcel and the others noticed that Laios and the lion were motionless. Suddenly, to their astonishment, Laios drew his sword and beheaded the winged lion. They could hardly believe he had succeeded. Marcel was particularly shocked that he had overcome the demon's temptations, prompting them to rush towards him. However, as they started to sprint, Izutsumi surged ahead of the group and, without hesitation, attacked Laios, decapitating him. Marcel and the others were stunned by her actions. Marcel questioned whether Izutsumi was under the control of the winged lion. Izutsumi denied this, explaining that Laios had specifically instructed her to do so. Marcel demanded an explanation, prompting Izutsumi to disclose that Laios had instructed her to kill him if the plan failed and explicitly told her not to revive him. Marcel, visibly shocked, argued that they hadn't yet failed. Izutsumi countered, suggesting something about him seemed off, convincing her that the plan had indeed failed. Marcel insisted that Izutsumi might have misunderstood the situation, but Izutsumi urged them to quickly leave before the dungeon collapsed. At that moment, Senshi, noticing something unusual, directed their attention back to Laios. Astonishingly, Laios picked up his severed head and reattached it to his body. The group was left wondering what had become of Laios. As the winged lion took control of Laios' body, Marcel and the others recoiled upon seeing him casually reattach his head. Laios asked about their concerns, asserting that it was indeed him. They expressed skepticism, unable to reconcile the sight of him having his head severed. Laios, scratching his head, made a telling remark that the last thing Laios would do is sabotage his own plans. It became clear it was the lion speaking through Laios, and he requested that they overlook the unsettling event. He assured them of his peaceful intentions and his commitment to their happiness. Marcel, unsettled, implored him to stop and began searching earnestly for the true Laios. He initially attempted to convince them that he was indeed Laios, but then reconsidered. He suggested they proceed and cautioned them to watch their step. Confused by his remark, the group was caught off guard when the ground suddenly began to sink. Marcel and the others fell into the hole and landed where the elves and their companions were located. Initially startled by the arrival, the group relaxed upon recognizing Marcel and her party. Namari quickly approached them to check on their well-being, inquiring about what had transpired. She expressed relief upon seeing that Marcel had discarded her unusual outfit. Marcel began searching for Laios, and Namari informed her that he had fallen down with them. Marcel was shocked to see him conversing with Kabru and the group. Noticing Marcel's gaze, Laios immediately turned and ran. Marcel yelled, pleading for someone to stop him. Namari, puzzled by her reaction, questioned what the issue was and if Marcel had returned to normal. Marcel explained that it wasn't really Laios. The demon had taken over his body. Chilchuk vouched for Marcel, confirming that she was indeed sane. Meanwhile, Kabru watched in disbelief as he saw him running away. Suddenly, stairs materialized from the water, providing a pathway that would lead him towards the surface. Laios stepped onto them and hurried upward, but Mizurn quickly got ahead of him and blocked his path. The lion within Laios's body cannot believe that Mizurn didn't know when to quit. He declared that his little scheme had resulted in complete failure and urged Mizurn to accept their defeat and allow him to ascend to the surface. Once there, he promised ample time to fulfill any wishes they might desire. However, Mizurn sternly told him to be silent. The lion responded, deeming that reaction unnecessary. He expressed a desire to bring everyone along if possible, but warned that it would be a different matter if Mizurn continued to obstruct his path. He then gestured towards something and declared he would handle it from there. Everyone, including Kabru, Suro, the orcs, Marcel, and the others, was taken aback as a massive monster loomed into view. Suddenly, a nightmare appeared. Mizurn attempted to strangle him, but Laios, citing his busy schedule as the new lord of the dungeon, asked for forgiveness and stated he simply couldn't devote every moment to dealing with him. He needed to attend to his own desires now. Suddenly, a brick from the tower emerged, forcefully ejecting Mizurn from the staircase and into the water. With Mizurn dealt with, the demon declared that from now on, they would have to contend with the monster instead of him. The group was curious about the nature of this monster. Namari remarked that it resembled something a child might doodle. Chilchuk then noticed the confident expression on the winged lion's face and sensed there was something significant about this creature. Suro speculated that Laios might have insights about the creature and inquired about his whereabouts. Marcel explained that Laios had disclosed his plan to become the lord of the dungeon in order to defeat the winged lion. This prompted her to recall the Laios Gourmet Guide. She quickly thumbed through the pages, searching for any information about the monster confronting them. As she reached the back of the last page, she noticed something written there. They discovered a drawing depicting what Laios had once referred to as the really cool monster he had imagined. Everyone was taken aback by the discovery. Laios had meticulously detailed every aspect of the monster's features, including its speed, abilities, form, and build. Marcel studied the information carefully before passing the book to the orcs, who then handed it to the elves and other adventurers present. Holm was curious about who had documented all this. Marcel confirmed that it was indeed Laios, calling him a total idiot in the process, which surprised everyone. Namari speculated whether the monster in front of them was the manifestation of Laios's wish. She pondered if Laios's desire was to transform into the absurd creature he had conceived. Marcel, visibly stressed, dismissed the idea, trying to convince herself that even Laios wouldn't resort to such an extreme. However, as she faced the monster, she realized she might be mistaken. Marcel questioned the group, asking if they also strongly felt that the monster might actually be Laios. Senshi affirmed that she wasn't alone in her suspicions. Marcel speculated that perhaps this was all part of Laios's plan. Abruptly, a voice cut through the air, instructing them not to be distracted by the monster. It was Flamila, urgently calling for anyone with knowledge of barrier magic to come forward immediately. She emphasized that it didn't matter if their skills were self-taught or imperfect, they needed to seal the hole in the sky above the dungeon right away. Flamila, clearly agitated, insisted that they could not allow the demon to take even a single step onto the surface, as its exit from the dungeon would spell disaster for the world. Although uncertain of their effectiveness, the elves volunteered their assistance. They began casting spells aimed at sealing the hole leading to the surface. The lion within Laios's body noticed their efforts and mockingly praised the makeshift nature of their spell work. He then declared that the real action was about to begin. Announcing that it was time for the monster to demonstrate its capabilities, the creature suddenly leaped up, creating massive waves in its wake, and then soared through the air, shattering the barrier above. The monster burst through, ripping a hole in the sky. Fragments from the sky fell into the water below, triggering widespread panic among everyone present. The demon praised his monster for demonstrating its formidable strength. He declared his intention to destroy the entire dungeon, asserting that it was no longer necessary. The monsters' heads began to gnaw at the barrier that separated the dungeon from the surface. Chilchuck realized the gravity of their situation, recognizing that Laios had fully transformed into a monster. Marcel was at a loss, not having anticipated that it could physically dismantle the barrier. At that moment, Chilchuck had an idea. A quaddle appeared, and Chilchuck realized Marcel had summoned it. He inquired if she could command it. Taking up the challenge, Marcel attempted to direct the creature. Successfully taking control, she maneuvered the quaddle towards the monsters. It then aggressively bit into the monster. Marcel was astounded that the quaddle had swallowed the monster. She pondered her next steps but reassured herself that it should be all right. After all, they had been consumed by that creature before, and it had been surprisingly spacious inside. On the ground, Flamila noticed the monster's disappearance and rallied the elves, urging them not to surrender but to attempt erecting another barrier. Despite their visible discomfort, they followed her commands. Flamila reassigned those unable to cast the barrier spell to support roles, asking them to share their mana with the spellcasters. Additionally, she directed those still able to move to evacuate the wounded. While observing the quaddle, Marcel noticed that the serpent was behaving oddly. Abruptly, the monster inside tore through the quaddle's body to free itself. Now, Laios, in his monstrous form, was liberated. Overwhelmed, Marcel collapsed, and as her companions rushed to her aid, she blamed herself, lamenting that the chaos was a consequence of her actions as the dungeon lord and her attempts to resurrect Farlin using ancient magic. She was distraught at the thought that the world's potential end was her fault. However, Izutsumi and Chilchuck attempted to soothe her, insisting that this was not the moment for self-reproach. Kabru reacted similarly, collapsing into the water. As his party members rushed to his side, he blamed himself for the unfolding chaos. Despite his persistent doubts and the uneasy feelings he had about Laios, he lamented the numerous chances he had to eliminate Laios, all of which he had let slip away. Reflecting on his actions, he questioned what he had been doing all along and what purpose his survival of Utaya's tragedy served. With the world seemingly on the brink of ending, Kabru declared himself wholly responsible and despairingly requested someone to end his life at that moment. However, he too was admonished that now was not the time for such thoughts. Suddenly, to Marcel's astonishment, Mizerne approached Kabru and slapped him. Following this, Marcel mentioned she had calmed down somewhat, emphasizing that now was not the time for inaction. They needed to act, and as they pondered their next steps, Marcel proposed that they temporarily disregard Laios and instead focus on directly slowing down the winged lion. When questioned about her plan, Marcel suggested destroying the tower and promptly cast an explosion spell on it. Despite the spell, the demon remained unscathed. Senshi noted his complete lack of injuries, which Marcel had anticipated. Chilchuck inquired about her next plan, to which she responded that their only option was to try and retrieve him, even if it meant ascending to confront him directly. Meanwhile, the elves continued to construct the barrier while the rest supported the mages. As the demon ascended the stairs, he lamented the state of his tattered clothes on what he anticipated would be a historic day. Considering the occasion, he decided to change into something more fitting and opted for armor, although he critiqued it as somewhat mundane. He remarked that his physique wasn't particularly suited to fancy clothes to begin with. As he made these adjustments, he noticed Marcel and the others charging towards him. He expressed pleasure at their arrival to bid him farewell. Marcel, clearly infuriated, demanded that he relinquish Laios' body, asserting that he didn't even need it. However, the demon countered that he indeed needed it. Confined within, he had previously been able to use his powers only to obey his master's commands. But now, as his own master, he could set the rules and use his power for his own purposes. He acknowledged that it was Laios' wish that he had to thank for this newfound freedom. The demon remarked that he had been fulfilling their myriad desires since time immemorial. He then posed the question, Isn't his current wish relatively minor in comparison? Marcel, catching her breath, responded that it would be, if it truly were a minor thing. As the demon drew closer to the surface, Marcel and her companions motivated themselves to push a little further. They mustered all their remaining energy and sprinted towards the demon, managing to catch up to him. Unfortunately, they were too late. He had already reached the final step. To their astonishment, they found themselves already at the surface. Marcel was in disbelief, while the demon reveled in his triumph. Suddenly, something happened that made everyone close their eyes and look down, sparking curiosity among them all. Those still in the dungeon, including Namari, the elves, and even the orcs, sensed that something was amiss. Time seemed to have stopped for everyone. Marcel demanded to know what the demon had done. The demon declared that the time had come to transport everyone back to his world, where from this point forward, no one would ever die. In this realm of infinity, everyone's desires would perpetually be fulfilled. However, he disclosed some disappointing news. He would have to leave them behind. This separation was part of his agreement with Laios, meaning they would have to continue their lives in their current world. The demon announced, "Let us set forth," and with a swift motion, he swiped at the sky, tearing open a portal that summoned a bizarre creature adorned with numerous hands. Namari was the first to be seized and devoured by this creature, followed rapidly by everyone else in the dungeon, including the orcs and Kabru's party. The demon proclaimed that the time had arrived for them to commence a perpetual feast, and he laughed ominously. Ultimately, it all boils down to one thing: eat or be eaten. Unexpectedly, a hand from the monster reached out and grabbed the demon. Marcel, Chilchuk, Senshi, and Izutsumi watched in disbelief as Laios, now a monstrous figure, drooled at the sight of the demon inhabiting his body, clearly taking the demon by surprise. Laios, transformed into a monster, gives in to his desires, surprising the demon within his body. His long-standing dream of becoming a monster realized, Laios' first desire is to taste human flesh. The demon inside him questioned whether there might be something else he'd prefer to do. At the same time, Chilchuk and the others rallied behind Laios, encouraging him to devour the winged lion. Senshi, however, expressed concern that consuming the lion might permanently trap Laios in his monstrous state. Recognizing the direness of the situation, Marcel warned the lion that if he wished to survive, he must restore Laios to his human form. She pointed out that as a human, when one dies, their existence is extinguished completely. They said the lion have sealed his own fate by merging with Laios and challenged him to concede defeat and, while he was at it, to resurrect Farlin. The lion then called them simpletons, questioning whether they had yet to comprehend the full scope of the situation. He explained that this thing was merely a fragment of his entire being. Now that they had emerged from the dungeon, the entire world above served as an extension of his body. The monster bit into Laios' human form and appeared satisfied. However, as it continued to chew, it began to vomit more Laios, spawning hundreds of them. Unbothered, the winged lion encouraged the monster to indulge to its heart's content, noting the abundant supply of Laios clones that seemed to multiply further. He mused whether they would run out of Laios copies first, or if the monster's stomach would fill up first, proposing a playful competition to see if the monster could potentially consume all of him. Meanwhile, the hands emerging from the sky continued to seize and devour all creatures below. Izutsumi observed that all of humanity might be consumed while the two entities were preoccupied with their conflict. Marcel, clearly worried, wondered aloud about her next course of action. Senshi suggested that they might be out of options at this point. Chilchuk then declared his intent to grab onto one of those hands and jump into a hole, asserting that he refused to be left behind in that world. However, several Laios clones intervened, stating that they could not allow him to do that. They insisted that they would have to spend the remainder of their lives in that world. The lion suggested that if he missed his wife and daughter, he could simply recreate them, confidently claiming he could produce replicas indistinguishable from the originals. Chilchuk then told him to stop. Abruptly, the Laios who was speaking to him was seized by the monster. Another Laio's clone cautioned the monster to be careful, as it had almost consumed one of his friends. The winged lion warned everyone to keep their distance, explaining that Laio's, now in monster form, could no longer recognize who they were. He then taunted the monster, beckoning it to come and capture him. Following this, one of the monster's heads licked all the Laio's clones atop it, chewed them up, and swallowed them. Yet, another Laio's clone appeared once more. The monster was surprised to see more and more Laio's clones appear, despite continuously devouring them. The clones multiplied, gradually climbing onto the monster's heads. The lion inquired about the issue, reminding them, as he had said before, that there was still plenty more of Laio's to go around. He then drew his sword, and each Laio's clone wielded one as well. Together, they stabbed at the monster's heads. After trying a taste, the lion remarked that it was blander than he had anticipated. He then questioned the monster about its feelings, specifically what it was like to have the tables turned against it. The lion inhabiting Laio's body continued to laugh uproariously. Numerous Laio's clones within the monster's body relentlessly stabbed it, causing significant bleeding. The winged lion taunted the monster, questioning why its eating pace had slowed. He suggested that perhaps they should simply overwhelm and crush it, or alternatively, devour it from the inside out. Suddenly, Marcel interjected, urging them to stop, asserting that such extreme measures were no longer necessary. In response, the winged lion stated that Laio's had not specified how he wished to be treated after his transformation into a monster, which meant he was free to treat him as he saw fit. He pointed out that if all the people in this world disappeared, Laio's, now a monster, might eventually turn against them. Given this situation, the lion considered addressing it immediately. He candidly admitted that he really had no further use for him. All of Laio's clones began jabbing at the monster's eyes, causing it to become hysterical. Izutsumi commented that for a creature touted as the strongest monster, it seemed rather weak. Chilchuk added that no matter how strong a monster might be, it couldn't be expected to combat something that completely defies logic. He noted that having 3 heads simply provided more vulnerabilities. This sparked their curiosity about what truly made it the strongest monster. Prompted by this question, Marcel reopened Laio's guidebook to search for answers. The winged lion continued its assault on the monster's eyes, commenting that it appeared possible to enter through the eye socket, while another clone mentioned attempting entry through the ear. Some even suggested the nostril as a viable route. They initiated a race to see who could reach the monster's brain first. Clearly, the monster struggled significantly as numerous Laio's clones pierced it from all directions. The lion remarked that his affection for animals had not served him well in this instance. He mused that if he had transformed into a different kind of monster, perhaps a spirit or a glowing orb of light, he might have avoided such severe pain. The winged lion, inhabiting Laio's body, reveled in his triumph as he watched the monster struggle and eventually fall into the water. Marcel and the others watched in disbelief, while the lion questioned whether the monster's stomach was already full. The lion then declared that the real excitement was about to begin. He announced it was time to carve up the monster and turn it into a meal, promising a variety of dishes. Meanwhile, the Laio's clones began to consume the monster. In its agony on the ground, the monster inquired what Laio's had eaten. As it continued to chew and gulp down, the winged lion demanded it spit out whatever it was eating. Despite repeated instructions to do so, the Laio's inside the monster's body was too captivated by his meal. The winged lion attempted to intervene, reaching for what Laio's held and questioning why he possessed it. Laio's explained his curiosity about the nature of desire, a concept a being like himself is deeply fixated on, and wanted to taste what such a desire might be like. Thus, Laio's consumed that desire, prompting an infuriated response from the winged lion, who pleaded for him to stop. Laio's was unstoppable. The winged lion protested, claiming ownership and declaring that what Laio's consumed was his appetite. As this unfolded, Marcel continued to pore over the guidebook, studying the entry for what Laio's had dubbed the really cool monster I thought up. According to the guidebook, This monster could fly through the sky at 300 kilometers per hour, generate forests from its poop, swim in the ocean, and even digest desires. Marcel noted that the last detail had been recently added, suggesting that Laios had made a specific wish to be able to consume the demon's appetite, its desire to eat. While Marcel hoped this was true, she couldn't shake the feeling that it might just be a coincidence. Senshi remarked that Laios was an unbelievable character. As Laios savored the winged lion's desire, he commented on its unique taste, neither sweet nor spicy and indescribable. The more he consumed it, the greater his craving grew. He began to think he would do almost anything to satisfy this appetite, describing the taste as resembling the driving force of life itself. The winged lion, clearly infuriated, demanded its return. However, Laios' monstrous form was preventing any interference. Laios argued that the demon didn't truly need it. Given his bottomless appetite, that desire was more like a poison to him and was the reason for his imprisonment within that world. The winged lion countered, insisting Laios had no understanding of the situation. Laios retorted that even though the winged lion was an extraordinary being from another realm, in their world, he must adhere to their rules, which boiled down to eat or be eaten. Laios seized the winged lion and declared that if he was going to continue eating, he would consume him to ensure his own survival. Laios then began to voraciously eat the winged lion. The lion struggled to resist, but he was unable to stop Laios. Overpowered, the lion soon found himself being consumed by Laios, who even let out a burp afterwards. The winged lion, clearly distressed, examined his body and realized that something was missing, the very thing he had first acquired upon entering this world. No longer able to eat, he found he could no longer feel desire for anything. Everything had become dull and meaningless. He felt as though he had lost what made him him. Laios asserted that there was no need for him to be constrained by such things, proclaiming that his existence was meant to be freer. He advised the winged lion not to waste his time being consumed by a single pursuit and reminded him that he was free to go wherever he pleased. As the winged lion began to fade away, he issued a curse on Laios and seized him, declaring that his greatest desire would never be fulfilled. This made Laios think of his sister. As he slowly disintegrated, the lion told Laios that he didn't have much time left and that he could spend it regretting his actions. He called them pathetic little creatures and stated that their kind exists solely to starve.